Welcome back to another action figure review. In today's episode I'm going to be taking a look at the brand new Time Lord set as based on the story The Deadly Assassin. This set includes the 4th Doctor in Time Lord robes, Chancellor Goth, and a secret incarnation of Borusa that definitely isn't from this story. So before we look at these really good figures, let's begin as always by taking a look at the packaging. As before, we do have the same style guide as the last wave, with the set being in a vibrant white with the TARDIS and the logo on the sides. You also have the same old gold foil sticker stating that this set is a limited edition. And as before, we also have the glowing vortex thing going around the edge of the window box display, this time being in a lighter blue, which is clearly going to be used on all of the 4th Doctor's merchandise. The back of the box contains some information about the story itself, which makes out to be an interesting little read, so pause if you want to read here. And then taking a look at the backdrop, it's pretty much the same as before. The same blue glowing vortex with the 3 figures encased on the blister card, which is a first for the 3 packs, as they were never affected in last year's sets, but it seems that this is now going to be the norm with these 3 packs going on in the future. Out of the box, all 3 figures do look amazing. I know this set in particular has spun a lot of controversy, which isn't unusual when it comes to the figure range, but this is something I've actually been looking forward to myself for a very long time. The Deadly Assassin has always been a fan favourite of mine, and it's finally nice to see some representation here. So starting with the hero of the set, we of course have the 4th Doctor in the Time Lord robes. Now this is something that fans of the classic era were desperate to see in action figure form for quite some time. I mean, it made sense considering we have seen almost every version of him, and this one is iconic in itself. You know, I mean, it's used on most publicity images of the show when it comes to posters or DVDs. It's always had a main focal point on any type of merchandising. Even though he only wears it for a very short period of time, it's just that iconic. Like I said, for quite some time people have been wanting an official release of this, and I think they have done a fairly decent job. It's quite stellar. I think there is a few things I would like to have seen a bit differently, but more on that in a bit. Beginning with the collar, it's been cast in this transparent orange colour, which represents the fiberglass props really well. The lining around the edges is also depicted really well, and it's in this slightly lighter orange. You also have the seals of Rassilon embossed onto the collar, which again is another great detail, and I'm glad that they've added it. If you do take a closer look though, you can see the original newer Time Lord seal underneath, but it's only noticeable when you actually take a closer look. The seals have been depicted in gold and black and are extremely well done, with no paint bleeds on mine whatsoever, and they seem to be in the place they're meant to be. Swiftly looking at the robes, these have all just been depicted in a orangey brown colour, which is quite accurate to the on-screen garment, with a lighter gold wash over the top just to depict some of the washes. It looks really good in my opinion. And then looking at the boots, as you can see, they have just been painted in a glossy orange, which also contrasts well with the rest of the paint apps, even though you don't really see what he's wearing underneath. I mean, he may have not worn boots, but you know, it's still quite good. So now with all that out of the way, let's bring our attention to the head sculpt itself, which has caused a lot of dispute online, again, to whether it's really that good or not. So personally for me, I think it's okay in certain angles. I think it does look like Tom Baker, especially when looking at the nose. I mean, it's very iconic, but I think the downside here is undoubtedly the thick paint apps. I know this is inexcusable considering we did get some really good paint apps on some of the previous figures, but it's a bit of a shame that this one is slightly a bit of a letdown with the shoddy eyes. Mine don't actually look that bad. I mean, I have seen ones which are properly slanting and they're sliding down the side of the face. I mean, I feel like I've gotten quite lucky with mine, but there are some slightly bad ones out there. I mean, other than that, I think the sculpt is very nice. I think they could have done what they did with the 6th Doctor, with the TARDIS set, where they just molded the skin colour into the plastic. I think that would have worked out better off. I mean, who knows, it may have not, but it's a bit iffy. The hair itself and the skull cap is also very nicely depicted and is quite unique on how it sits on the Doctor's head. It doesn't look out of place or shoddy in any way, and I also like the added details with the hands being painted in a flesh tone colour, since the Doctor didn't wear any gloves when donning the robes in the story. My only gripe on all of the figures is that the arms do not have the draped fabric like on the on-screen costumes, but I do understand that the limits that these budget sets have. It's only one gripe that I do have with the free figures, but it's something that I can personally live with. I'm still glad that we finally have this version of the Fourth Doctor, though despite having a bit of a shoddy head, I think it could be fixed if you remove all the paint and you repaint it yourself, but I'm probably going to leave mine as is. Now moving on to the main feature of the set, which is of course Chancellor Goth, as played by Bernard Horsfall. Now this is something that a lot of fans were not anticipating, let alone dreaming of owning. I mean, if you told me years ago this is what we were going to be getting, a Chancellor Goth, I would probably laugh at you, because I never thought in a million years would we be getting this iconic character. Well, iconic to the story, but still. Now, the attire is pretty similar to what the Doctor wears, but there are slight differences between the two. To start off with, we have the silver and black diamond motif running down the front of the robes, which is very detailed and depicts the on-screen pattern well. It's very simplistic in design, which works well on a small scale. The collar itself is pretty much the same. This time the piping has been painted red, with a gold trim going in between the bands. However, this is not continued on the back, and that goes with all three figures. It is a bit of a disappointment, and it just really feels incomplete without it. So this is something I will rectify myself at a later date, and it's just a bit of a shame that this cock-up happened. Unlike the Doctor's hands, Goth's has been painted in this brown orangey colour, similar to the boots, with silver discs on top on each of the hands, which represents the communicators that all of the Time Lords had, which is a really cool touch. Another small detail that I should add is that just under the robes, you can see that the undergarment is actually a lighter colour to the rest of the body, with the dark V shape just above the waistline, which is also quite accurate. And then finally, taking a look at the head sculpt, they have outdone themselves with this. I think this depicts Bernard really well. It definitely doesn't skim around the edges, and I feel like this likeness is absolutely perfect when it comes to the actor's likeness. The paint apps on the eyes and on the eyebrows are really, really good. The grey hair poking out the sides of his cap are really well painted, with darker grey as the base colour, with lighter washes over the top. And then to finish things off, you also have the same colour skull cap like the Doctor has, which is this maroon colour, the brown being depicted as the trim. Now, my only criticism with this head sculpt in particular is that it is ever so slightly out of proportion. I think it is slightly too big in my opinion. I think it could be slightly smaller. I mean, having it in front of me now, I think it should just be ever so slightly smaller, but it's still good nonetheless. I mean, one thing I should mention as well on all the Time Lord, well, on the Time Lord figures themselves, is that all of them had this sort of silvery makeup on. Sadly, that is not depicted on these figures. I suppose on a small scale of things, it may have not been possible to add it on and make it look authentic. It may have looked a bit silly. So that is one thing that Goth or Borusa sadly do not have. So really, this is the best figure out of the set in my view. The likeness for Bernard Horsfall is so defined, as it definitely depicts how he would have looked within the story. And like I said, it's absolutely mad that we're living in an age where you've got this character in figure form, as I never thought in a million years that we would actually have a Goth action figure. It's just absolutely mental that he now exists, and you can pair him up with the Master. Taking a look at the final figure, which is apparently meant to be Cardinal Borusa, which, you know, it clearly isn't. I mean, unless it's from another dimension that I clearly slipped into, then fair enough. But from what's been said, apparently the money ran out, so they couldn't even do a new head sculpt for Borusa, which is sadly a huge shame. But one thing I don't really get is why would they package it as Borusa and not just a Time Lord figure? Because in all honesty, I think it's a bit of a cop-out. The head sculpt itself is actually the same head used on the Time Lord figure from many moons ago that came out in the new series pack, with slightly different paint decors to differentiate it from the original, which, yeah, I just think is a bit naughty if I'm all honest. But luckily, if you are a customizer like I am myself, then there was a head released by Scott Richard, and NDW Design have released their own custom head to replace this inaccurate one, which is something I'm definitely going to do at some point. I am a bit rusty, I would admit, when it comes to painting skills, but I'm willing to give it a go. Sadly, at the time of recording, the head is now out of stock, but you never know, they may do reprints on occasional times. They do eagerly re-release old sculpts occasionally, so do keep a lookout on Nathan's Etsy store, and they may be available at some point. Okay, rant over about the head. Inaccurate head aside, it is still a nice sculpt nonetheless. The skull cap is actually quite different with all the beads and whatnot going on, which again isn't accurate to the story, but they do appear in later Gallifreyan stories. In actual fact, the next time we do see the Time Lords, they have all these precise detailings. The paint apps on the head are really nice and crisp, with yellowish eyebrows for some reason, and the hair sticking out of the side is painted in a dark grey. The robes and the collar this time around have been painted in a dark purple, which again, very accurate to the on-screen counterpart. And the collar's edging around the back has been missed out, and it's only just painted on the front, which is a bit of a ball ache when it comes to people wanting things looking nice, accurate. You know, it's something that I will probably do and make sure it has got it on, as, you know, I'm a stickler for them kind of things. But if you're only displaying them from the front, it's not that much of an issue. This time on the robes, you have gold detailing running all around the purple robes and the arms as well, which is again fairly accurate to what was seen on screen. You also have the silver lining running down the front, and his undergarments are a slightly different shade of purple, which also has the same V-shaped piece just above his waist. Sadly on mine, when I first received this, there was a slight bleed of silver paint running across the undergarments, which was a bit of a pain to remove, but I was able to get it, and it looks okay in the end. It's slightly sort of rubbed the paint underneath, but it looks good nonetheless, and from afar you can't really tell that there was anything there in the first place. The gloves this time around have been painted black, with the silver communicators also being present on each hand, and to finish things off, his boots have been depicted in purple to match the rest of his ensemble. Again, I get why this has had to happen because of how they've had to stick to their budgets and all, but if I'm honest, I think they should have just packaged this guy as a random Time Lord in the background. I mean, God, there was many looking like that. It wouldn't have bothered me in the slightest. Or they could have just packaged him with the President, because a lot of people have picked it out saying he does look like the actor who played the President, and to be fair, it wouldn't have bothered me in the slightest. Or they could have repurposed the Master from that story, but with new paint apps, because I know a lot of people are after that toy still, as it's a very hard one to get these days. But at the end of the day, this Time Lord figure is brilliant nonetheless, and I think when I've got the new head actually attached, it will look a lot better. For articulation, all three figures share the same movements, such as the head turning from side to side, but only slightly, just due to the fact it's being hindered by the collar. Same goes with the arms. They can't really do a full 360 twist. The biceps, however, can do a 360 twist, but for some reason they are slightly loose. The elbow joints can bend at a 90-degree angle with full movement at the wrists. The waist can also move, but is hindered by the robes, and has some slight movement at the legs, but it's also hard to move due to limitations. Well, to conclude this video, I'd argue to say that this is still a pretty neat set, considering its limitations. I know some fans' feathers were ruffled considering it's a bit niche, but for someone who is a massive fan of the story, this has reached all my expectations. The Doctor in Time Lord robes is something that I've personally wanted to see, and Chancellor Goth was a complete surprise to me. I didn't think that was ever going to happen, and yeah, Borusa is a bit of a cop-out, but you could probably get a more accurate look with a bit of customization to look like his on-screen counterpart. Or even then, you can still just pretend he is a regular Time Lord walking about in purple robes, as there were several in the background that wore similar robes. Hell, I might even track another one down just to put this guy in the background, just because it sort of feels like sacrilege defacing these action figures sometimes. It's still a good figure nonetheless, and that pretty much wraps up this review, so hopefully in the future you'll be seeing some more reviews on this wave, and stay tuned for then.